officiating 2020-21 for the Triangle Officials Association. This is our virtual clinic number 2. This is using the updated rules for 2021. For those of you that are new, I would tell you that I'm not going to read through the rules. You do need to read the rule book. And the way I do that, it normally is I will read a rule, say rule number 1, and then I'll go to the book that's called the Case Book and Officials Manual. And there's two. The first part of that book is an explanation of situations and the rules and how the rules are to be interpreted and under circumstances. And then the second part of that is a very, very good description of mechanics that we're to use. But when you're reading the rule book, read the rule book itself, the one called rules, and then use that case book. Do those, and I think you'll be pretty well grounded. So, but we're going to go through a number of rules here in this session. First thing we're going to go through is rule number 1, the game. Pretty simple, but the game is volleyball. The game is when we have a match, which is one of our recorded events, it's made up of sets. So we call these units of play sets. We do not call them games. The game is volleyball. In a normal varsity match, we will play 3 out of 5 sets. The first 4 sets would be to 25, and the team to win has to be ahead by 2 points. And if there's a 5th and deciding set, that set would be to 15. And again, the winning team will need to win by 2 points. Now, that's the standard match. But there are a lot of, quote, non-standard matches that we have. JV matches, for instance, are 2 out of 3. And depending on where you play that match and the situation, that 2 out of 3 might have the third set to 25 points, or it might be to 15 points. So the key thing is for you to know what you're playing as far as the number of sets and whether or not there's a win by 2, win by 1, if there's a cap, if there's any other special rules. So ask the coaches. They'll know if there are any special rules. If they're not, you play a varsity set 3 out of 5, 5th set to 15, and all sets 1 by 2. If you're playing 2 out of 3 and there are no special rules, the third set would be to 25 points. So only if you have a 5th set would be 15, unless there's a special rule. Make sure, last year I went to a couple of matches where it was unclear that the coaches and the referees knew what the third set was being played to. Was it 15 or 25? And was it win by 1 or win by 2? Make sure you know, and make sure that everyone knows at your pregame conference. All right, the time between sets is 3 minutes. It can be extended between the second and third set by what's called an interval. That interval can be used for promotional activity or special recognition. It must be requested by the home team and only the home team. If it's requested, it must be permitted. Last year, I had no matches where anyone even brought it up, but if they do, it has to be requested prior to or at the pre-match conference. If we forgot about it, the second set ended and they were like, we want it to be 5 minutes and you did not cover that in the pre-match conference, I'm sorry, but we'll have to go with what we all agreed at the pre-match conference, which is the standard 3 minutes between sets. Remember that if the teams are on the court and ready to play prior to the expiration of the timed 3 minutes, you can go ahead and start the next set. But make sure if you do that the teams are actually finished with their coaching. I find that oftentimes we want to make the match move faster than the coaches are really ready for. If they're still working with a player, still talking to a player, either the coach or even an assistant coach during the interval between sets or a timeout, we need to let them use their full time there, and then we begin our beginning of the next set. Each team is allowed 2 timeouts per set. They can use those timeouts before the set actually starts if they want to. How do you determine who serves first? Under current rules, there'll be a coin flip before at the pre-match conference before the match, and the visiting captain will call that toss, and whoever wins the toss has the choice of serving or receiving. They can choose to serve or receive. The home team gets to choose which court they will use for the first set, and they do that by virtue of choosing where their bench will be in set one. If you don't really have a home team, in other words, it's a neutral site, then ask the game management who will be designated as the home team. And if you get to your conference and you still don't know, just ask the teams who should be designated as the home team on the scoreboard, and that'll be who gets to decide which court they use for the first set. If you have a deciding set, either a 2 out of 3, the third set, or 3 out of 5, that fifth set, the coin toss is called by the home captain, not by the visiting captain, but the home captain. The winner of the toss then gets to choose either to serve, to receive, or to choose which side of court they will play for that set. And in high school, they will stay on the same side of the court for a deciding set. There is no switching at midway point of anything. So that's pretty much that. So when a team commits a fault, and a fault can be something like letting the ball land in your court, or touching the ball and it lands out of bounds. There's lots that we'll go through. The result is what's called a loss of rally, and because the rally is the actual moving of the ball back and forth across the net. When you lose a rally, a point is awarded to your opponent. And if the team that won the rally was serving, they score the point and they continue to serve. If the receiving team won the rally, then they score a point. They rotate one position clockwise, and then they would then serve. Okay. To start a match, a team must have 6 players to start. Okay. If you have a case where the team is late, well, then the team is late. You don't start the match and have forfeits and all that stuff. Find out why they're not there. The point is to play the match. It's not to penalize them for things outside their control when the bus breaks down or there's terrible traffic, things like that. But if a team is ready to play, except for they only have 5 players, they can call their timeouts once you've got ready to play. You've gone through your time interval, your time warm-ups and everything. They can call their timeouts, and if they can't, they still don't have them after they've called both of their timeouts, and then they have to forfeit the first set, then you would start the 3-minute timer for the interval between that first and second set. You time that 3 minutes. Again, if they're not ready, they could call their timeouts again. Point is, we want this to never happen, but it does. And if it does, they have to have 6 players to start. They do not have to have 6 players to finish the match. If a player is injured or for some other reason cannot play and they don't have a substitute, then they could play with 5 or fewer players. But every time that position that player, which is now absent, would have been in and would have occupied, when it goes back to the serve position, they're going to lose that rally at that point, and a point is awarded to their opponent. A team can only play with fewer than 6 players if they have fewer than 6 players. If they have any players on the bench and on the roster, they must play. They can't play with a position empty by their own choice. They must play. Okay. It's really important. One of the things that we're going to do is we're going to have a pre-match conference. I've already mentioned it a few times. Okay, but we're going to do this pre-match conference before the timed warm-up periods, and then each team after the conference must be afforded a timed warm-up period. The duration of that time warm-up period is not specified in the rules. One of the traditions has been, for instance, at the state tournament, we'll always give each team 5 minutes, then the other team 5 minutes, the original team will get 5 more minutes, and then 5 more minutes. The reason you do this which is different from other sports, is that we only have one net, and the conditions of the court are greatly affected by that net, the lighting, any sort of air movement within the facility. So you don't have two basketball goals to shoot at. That's why we have to do this in order. A team does not have to use their period. If they're there and they just want to stand out there and talk, they can do that, or they can even just sit on their bench and talk. But we're going to time the warm-up period as if they were actually using the court. We don't take the court away from them if they're not using it. It's still their time, because they could choose at any time to run out there and start doing some sort of drill or whatever they want to. Ask the coaches what they want to do for time warm-ups. Some of the conferences are now mandating what they'll do for these warm-up periods, but ask the coaches what they want to do, and it's really up to them. We can influence that, but it's really their choice. Now, at this pregame conference, the head coach must attend, and whatever coach is designated at the pregame conference will be the head coach. Okay, and now an assistant coach could come to the pre-match conference and listen in, but we need to make sure if there are multiple adults at that conference, who is the head coach for purposes of standing to coach during play. Okay, so it has to be, and that person has to be at the meeting. Okay, the team can send one or more captains to that pre-match conference. The captain does not necessarily have to be a captain in the actual play, right? Team may just send up their two seniors to be the captain, and they might not even play during the match. So the captain at the pre-match conference is not anything like a speaking captain or anything like that in some other sports. They're just a captain for purposes of that pre-match conference. The R1 is going to conduct that conference. We're going to talk about who's going to be the line judges. Do we have bench personnel for our timers and scorers? Key thing we're going to talk about is what the areas that are playable and not playable are. Make sure everyone agrees and understands what's going to be playable and not playable, because once the ball goes into a not playable or beyond the reach of a player in an unplayable area, it's out of bounds. So we need to make sure we cover that in detail. Finally, the head coach must supply to the R2 the team roster, and you do that before you commence the conference. And they've gotten used to that. It's worked out really well. One last thing is we need to ask specifically who is the game day administrator. Okay, the game day administrator is the person you're going to invoke if you have a problem, pretty much of any sort, but the main problem you'll have is with spectators. If you have a problem with spectators, you want to ask for the game day administrator, and that person, you'll ask them to take care of the spectators. So you must find out who that is, and we are directed by the state association to write into the score sheet who the game day administrator is. So I do that as soon as I'm finished. I'll write it down on my little card, which I keep for this kind of note in my pocket, and then I'll make sure it's on the score sheet. Okay. Last thing about the game. Artificial noisemakers are prohibited. Prohibited. They're not can be used at certain times. No, they're prohibited throughout. The only music and sound effects that are allowed, and these are not with whatever we're going to designate as artificial noisemakers, is during the warm-ups, during timeouts, during the interval between sets, and then of course after the match, they can play music and whatnot. Okay, artificial noisemakers prohibited, and what you consider a noisemaker is up to you. There's no rule about what that is, but if you find that if they're shaking paper and it's causing an interruption in play, then that's going to be an artificial noisemaker, and you're going to have that either removed or at least quieted during the match. All right, let's go to Rule 2. That's the court. You might reference your rule book. There's a picture, a diagram of the court. I'm going to only go through a few things here. The dimensions, whatnot, you do need to know those potentially for the rules. Obviously, we won't need those in when we go to a gym. Do make sure that the center line is continuous across the court. Sometimes the basketball has dominated the painting of the lines and we don't have a center line all the way across. Make sure you do have that. Notice also here that the team benches that I show across from the referee's platform, notice that they begin at the attack line and go to the end of toward the serving area. They can't be any closer to the officials, to the center line than the attack line. They can be further from the attack line. There's no reason that they have to go all the way up to there, but make sure they're at least as far away from the center line as the attack line. Okay, some terminology to know. The serving area is the area beyond the court on either end. It does include the small dashed lines. So those dashed lines are part of the serving area. And then we have attack lines at the 10 feet from the net to designate where the front and back row attacks occur. And we have a center line, should be continuous across. The two other areas to make sure you're aware of are the libero replacement zone and the substitution zone, or the sub zone. If you notice, the libero replacement zone goes from the attack line to the end line. So when a libero replacement's done, it must be done in that zone. The substitution zone is from the center line to the attack line. All right. So the key thing about the court is determining what is playable and not playable. So the R1 is going to determine and communicate that to the teams at the pre-match conference. So when I enter a gym, I usually like to walk around with the R2 and potentially even the line judges, if we have line judges from our association, and look at everything. Look at the overhead obstructions, look at the bleachers, etc. So remember that in the non-playable area, you're not going to allow any spectators. Now you may in fact have people in that area that are not players, photographers and whatnot. And oftentimes this will be a walk-through area for people entering the gym. But make sure you use safety as your criteria. What's safe for the players and potentially even the spectators, but primarily the players. And then communicate that at the pregame match. All right, so some of the ways the rule book set up, I'm not particularly sure make a lot of sense, but one of the things about the court, they talk about are overhead obstructions. We do not have any sort of limits as to how low ceilings can be or how low obstructions can be over the court. But what we're going to do is play everything that's above the court as a playable obstruction. So that means that if a team has another contact, in other words, they haven't used all three of their contacts, and the ball contacts the ceiling or some obstruction in the ceiling area, there is no whistle until the ball comes to rest, in which case, if they had another contact, we'd have a replay, or it moves outside the playable area or goes over the net, because then it would no longer be on their side. So anything where it touches the ceiling or parts of the ceiling and it remains on the side of the team that last contacted it, they can continue and have another contact. The only exception we have for that is in the case we have basketball goals. So if the basketball goal is not in the vertical basketball position, in other words, how you could actually play basketball on, we're going to treat it as an overhead obstruction. So in other words, the ball hits that, we're going to continue as if it had hit any other part of the ceiling. If it is in the vertical position, and this is during play, not during serves, but if it's in the vertical position and the ball contacts the basketball goal or it supports, we're going to immediately blow our whistle. The R1 will immediately blow their whistle and then judge whether or not the team could have had a play if the basketball goal was not present. So in most cases, you're going to say that there was no play possible because it was going out of bounds at such a rate that no one could catch it. But if in case the the player could have made a play. If the basketball goal is not there, you'll do a replay of that point. Finally, for purposes of testing, if the ball hits the cables used to suspend nets, again, we will stop play immediately and then judge whether or not, if the cable had not been there, whether or not there would be a replay. I've not been to any gyms here in our area that have these ceiling suspended nets. Okay, so the ball's going to be out of bounds when it touches anything out of bounds, touches a wall, a curtain, or any object. We don't play off the walls here, no matter how close the wall might be. And it's also out of bounds if it touches the floor, out of bounds. And remember, the boundary court lines are inbounds. They're inbounds. So if the ball or any part of the ball, when it touches down, touches that line, it will be inbounds. If it touches completely outside the lines, it will be out of bounds. Also, if the ball touches the antenna on the net or it passes outside the antenna, those would be out of bounds. If it touches any part of the net, cables, the referee's platform, anything that's outside or part of either the antenna or outside the antenna, touches any part of that net, it's out of bounds. So you blow your whistle immediately and award a point to the other team. You can have interference by non-players. Okay, so a non-team member would be someone such as a photographer or a kid that was, ran out, away from their parent or something. If a ball touches any of those, you're going to blow your whistle immediately, of course, and then decide, was that interference with the play or not? If it's not interference with the play, then it's just out of bounds and awarded to the other team. Okay, the team doesn't get a freebie because it happened to hit a photographer, even though they had no play on the ball. Okay, we talked about overhead. If it touches outside the playable area, overhead, then it's out of bounds. And once the ball goes beyond the reach of a player into a non-playable area, it's out of bounds. So if you're in a big gym and the ball goes up into the stands and it's still in the air, but it's way beyond where anybody can get to it, you can go ahead and blow your whistle before the ball actually touches, the stands or someone in the stands, because it's beyond the reach of a playable, beyond the legal reach into a non-playable area. And then finally, if you have a basketball goal in the basketball position, in other words, the vertical position, and the server serves into it or tosses into it, or again, if the basketball goal had not been there, then it's going to be out of bounds. All right. So as a referee, you're also going to stop play if a player uses some sort of obstacle or player to advantage. You can do it anytime that you believe that you have an injury and you need to prevent further injury. You can stop the ball at any time. And then we talked about the basketball goals. So when the player is at the edge of the playable area and reaches into the non-playable area, they can continue. The play can continue as long as when they contact the ball, they have at least one body part touching the floor. Now, what that means really, in practical terms, is that they'll have one foot or both feet on the floor in the playable area, and then they reach beyond the playable area to play the ball. After they've played the ball, they could fall into the non-playable area with no problem. Now, there is one thing to be aware of if we're in a situation where we have multiple matches going on within the same facility. So we have, so we're running a tournament. We have courts that are scheduled to be played on, even if they're not being played on at the particular moment. If a player goes into that adjacent court, into the court, not just the area around the court, but into that court, either before they play the ball, after, or anytime they go into that area, that is out of bounds, and the point will be awarded to the other team. That's all about safety, obviously, to keep both teams safe. All right, so that's rule 2. Look through that, make sure you understand everything, and that's primarily going to be things that we might see on a test. game equipment. First thing we have to have is we have to have a net to play volleyball. And that net's going to be between 36 and 39 inches wide, and it's going to stretch at least 31 and a half feet. Remember, our court's 30 feet wide, so it's at least 9 inches on either side of that net. It can be wider, but at least 31 and 6. And obviously, we're not going to measure that either. It needs to be white canvas, or it can be some sort of synthetic material, plastic or whatever, across the top and the bottom. We do allow net sleeves for advertising or team names nowadays. A lot of the teams, when they're buying new nets, are doing that. It really kind of adds to the atmosphere, I think. The thing that you want to be aware of, in addition to when we measure it to make sure it's in the right position height-wise, is to look for steel cables. A lot of these nets are put up and they're used year after year, and they get worn. They are steel cables that are used to hold the net up either at the top and sometimes at the bottom, but oftentimes at the top. And those steel cables are supposed to be covered in some sort of plastic material, but that wears off and sometimes it's not there. Make sure that the steel cables or any sort of steel tensioning devices at the top or bottom are covered before you start the match. And that's all the way from the net, wherever the net ends, all the way to your stand, and all the way to the post on the other side. Make sure those cover top and bottom. Doesn't have to be fancy. It can be covered with tape. It can be covered with plastic. It can be covered with a towel. But it needs to be covered to make sure the playable, it's protected from the players, or the players are protected from it, I guess. All right. And then the standards of poles will be at least 3 feet from the court, or 6 feet if it's attached to the wall, but we're not going to measure any of that stuff. Okay. Second thing we got to make sure of is that we have the right padding for the standards and for the front and sides of the referee's platform. Okay. I went to a match last year. It was the first match of the year. Get ready for the JV match. They don't have any of the padding out for the referee's platform. They did have the padding for the poles for the standards, but none for the referee's platform because they'd forgotten it. So make sure that you have it on the front and sides of the referee's platform as well as the standards. And if we were to have cables or braces, those have to be padded as well. I haven't seen those around. You are required to have a referee's platform, and ideally you want your head to be 2 to 3 feet above the net. You're going to use whatever platform they supply as long as you feel it's safe for you. If you do not feel it's safe for you, then you're going to inform the team that, see if they can make it safe. If they can't, you can, if required, and you don't feel that the platform is safe, you can call as the R1 from the court. Of course, that would be very much not ideal. You need to make sure you let the regional supervisor know that that occurred, but make sure you feel safe. Okay. When you measure the net, you'll have a chain, or as part of your equipment. Measure the net in 7 feet 4 1/8 at the center. Make sure that it's at that measurement at the center, and then the sidelines. When you go to measure the sidelines, those can be up to 3/4 of an inch higher than the center. Okay. And what I do when I go to the sideline, I'll put my net measurer on the sideline, on the outside edge of the sideline, so I can make sure the antenna is right on that outside edge of the sideline, and make sure it's attached. A lot of times the kids will put it up there and it won't be attached. Okay, the ball, it has to be either white or it can be multicolor, as long as a third of the colors, a third of the ball is white. And the main thing you want to do there is to measure. You must measure the pressure. Don't assume that they just played a match and the last match was fine. Measure the ball or balls, and hopefully you'll have at least 2, sometimes 3 balls. Measure them all with your gauge. They're supplied by the home team, and they need to have the National Federation High School mark on them. If they don't have any balls that have that mark, then we'll go ahead and play. You need to make sure the regional supervisor knows about it. I don't think we've had that problem recently, but we may, as we have new teams. But measure the ball, even if the previous match had just finished. Go ahead and measure it again. It only takes a second. All right. Score sheet, score book. But score sheet is going to be supplied by the home team. Oftentimes, the visiting team will have a score sheet as well, unless there's a reason to not use the home team's score sheet as the official score sheet. You're going to do that. There are cases where you'll find that the home team scorer may be a student that has never done it before, and the visiting team has an adult or maybe a player that's been playing for years and has done the score sheet many times. Then in that case, you could possibly choose the visiting team's score sheet as the official one. Judge that before the match starts. And then if you have the situation, make sure the two scorers sit together so they can, one can learn from the other. So I'm not going to go through score sheets. I don't think we have time for that, but I would highly recommend that you check this video out. I've got the reference to it. It's a couple years old, but it is right on as far as how to do scoring. It's really good. It's 20, 30 minutes. Go watch it and then encourage people that are scoring as you go to events. You send them to that as well. And after you watch it, you'll see why. It does not go through the administrative yellow cards or administrative red cards in that, at least the one I watched most recently. So you need to know how to do that as well. But the sheets themselves are by the home team and or the visitors. Okay, and on the diagram of the court, you saw there's an officials table. It needs to be at least 6 feet away from the court. Some places it's much further away from the court. The more space there, the better, the safer, and better for you when you're refereeing as the R2. The team benches obviously are going to be beside the officials table and can be no closer to the center line than the attack line extended. And the other thing, make sure there's enough seating for all the players. Some teams have a tremendous number of players they keep, and we need to make sure there's somewhere for all of them to sit. Okay. I'm going to now go to Rule 4, player equipment. In basketball, we don't have a lot of problems with equipment, but a couple of things that do occur. Basically, on your hands and on your forearms, you really can't have anything other than tape. A couple of times I've seen where girls will have they'll have a bracelet or something on, and they'll say, "Oh, I'll just tape it over." No, any sort of metal, any hard surfaces from the forearm down through the fingers is not allowed. So they are allowed to have tape on their fingers, and at higher levels, a lot of times they will. You can have padding. In other words, you can have like an elbow pad. So as you move up the body from the middle of the forearm up to the shoulder, you can have padding there, and that's allowed. And you can, of course, have knee pads and knee braces. All of this is part of the equipment, but not part of the uniform. And we talk about uniforms shortly. So if you have any knee pads knee braces or ankle bracelets, as long as those are worn as the manufacturer provided them without modification, and you feel they're safe, you've got to make sure you feel they're safe, then they're allowed. Okay. For hair control, we allow up to a 3-inch wide headband and ribbons, etc. So 3 inches wide, when you think about it, that's pretty wide headband. That pretty much covers all of my head. So, but remember, it has to be a headband. It can't be something that covers the head. Now, there are exceptions for religious, for religious head coverings, of course. Okay. You can use bobby pins. You can use flat berets, etc. Make sure if they have any sort of like berets or whatnot, that you judge them to be safe and that they're flat. They don't have any sort of raised, protrusions or anything. Because remember, these players will oftentimes run into each other. And imagine if you did that in two teammates, and now you have a severe laceration caused by one. So um, flat berets and bobby pins are allowed. And the rules on jewelry start from the time we have timed warm-ups through into play. Okay. Two exceptions: any sort of medical alerts are not jewelry, right? So if I have on my wrist a like a diabetic notice, that can be taped to my body. That is an exception that's allowed. Okay. If I have a religious medal, say a cross or something, as I wear as a necklace, then that is okay as long as it's taped to the body and under the uniform. Okay. And then finally, we allow no body paint or glitter on any players. That's not allowed. They're not allowed to participate in anything, including warm-ups with body paint and glitter. Sometimes you'll see that when they have a special occasions and stuff. And the players will know that. And they know it's not allowed. So you just tell them and they'll go clean it up. Okay. The player uniforms that consist of the top and the bottom. The top uniform, basically the uniform has to at least go to the waist. And if it's tucked in or hang below the waist, when standing in an upright position, you can't have any bare midriffs. It's okay that some of the thing will fly up and whatever when they're playing, but as long as they're in the standing position, there's no bare midriffs, then the top uniform top is fine. The bottoms, obviously the tops are going to be the same except for the libero. The bottoms have to be the same as well. So all the players have to have like colored bottoms, like colored. They don't have to be identical. They don't even have to be the same style. You could have one girl wear long blue shorts, and then one girl wears long blue skirt. That's okay as long as they're blue, or as long as whatever color they are, they're the same. If you have any undergarments, in other words, compression shorts and that kind of stuff, then those have to be a light color as well. But what's considered foundation items, things like bras and stuff, those do not have to be of a light color. Those can be of any color. Okay, uniform tops and bottoms must be worn as manufactured. In other words, they can't be tied in knots and things like that. They can't have any buttons, zippers, snaps, that kind of things. And none of them will. At most of the high school levels, you won't see anything like that, obviously, because they know about it. But just you're looking for safety again. And they can have names and logos, etc., flags. One thing, playing shoes are required. They're a required part of the uniform. So we have top, bottoms, and shoes are the required parts of the uniform. Okay. You'll see why that matters when we go through some rulings. Okay, and then what's greatly simplified from previous years is the libero top. Remember, their bottoms have to be of like color, but the libero top has to be immediately recognized from all directions. And it has to be in a color that clearly contrasts from the predominant color of the team's uniform top, the other players on the team. Okay. Some of the prescription that we used to have for libero tops, that's all been eliminated. And now we just have to make sure that the uniform top of the libero is clearly contrasted from the other players on the team. Okay. You have to have numbers. They have to be permanently affixed to the uniform top. They have to be on the front and the back. If you have any numbers on the shorts, on the bottoms, those must be the same number, or there's no reason to have any number on there. Okay. Now, it is unsporting conduct that you're going to charge to the head coach if any player removes any part of the uniform except their shoes. We said the uniform is the top, the bottom, and the shoes. If you take off any part of the top or the bottom in the area of play, that's no good. We're gonna penalize the coach with an unsporting conduct, and we're gonna inform the regional supervisor. And we're gonna, if we've lost our jurisdiction, in other words, the match has ended, we're gonna inform the coach that that's an unsporting conduct, and we're gonna inform the regional supervisor. Now remember, this is just for the uniform, right? I could take off, remember, I could take off my shoes. I could take off my knee pads. If I've got a warm up on, I can take off my warm up, etc. It's the uniform top and the uniform bottom. You're not allowed to change those. Just go outside the playing area, go out into the hall, go somewhere else to do that so that it's not in front of us. All right. What happens when we have a violation of these things? Now, the most common that we have is a player attempting to enter, or we discover them in the set with jewelry. In which case, we're gonna stop play, or we're gonna at the end of the play we're gonna stop it, or when they come to substitute, we're gonna stop. We're gonna charge the team with unnecessary delay, and they're either gonna immediately correct it, and that means immediately, like seconds, or they're going to be replaced or substituted for, or the team can call a timeout for the player to correct the problem. Okay, but it'd be unnecessary delay, for each set that occurs in. If the team shows up and they all have illegal uniforms, all right, so if that occurs, then we have a 1 point because there's a loss. We're going to award a loss of rally to the opponent of the team. We're going to award 1 point by virtue of the loss of rally, and we're going to inform the regional supervisor after the match that occurred. All right. Now, what equipment do we need? This is Rule 5.3, and I do it here to just try to get all of this out of the way at once. Okay. You're going to wear a blue short sleeve collared polo shirt like the one I've got on. This is the one piece of equipment that's only available from Gear Ref. Okay. Everything else is available because it's not under any sort of trademark or branding limits, but that's only available from Gear Ref. These shirts are really good. You can wear them multiple matches. I wear it with a black undershirt, and we've said as an association we're going to wear black undershirts with these. You can wear them multiple matches with no problem, and they launder really well once you do launder them. The black slacks, not shorts, black slacks with either a black belt, or if the slacks have no belt loops, then you don't need a belt. But if you do have slacks with belt loops, you need to have a black belt on it as well. And then solid black athletic shoes and black socks. And then the equipment that you need in addition to your uniform is you need a Fox 40 black whistle with a black lanyard. Okay. For this year, I believe the High School Association is going to allow us to use the Fox 40 electronic whistle. I've looked for some of those, and they seems to be a run on them. I can't imagine why. You need a red and a yellow cards, and this is for both referees. It's not just one referee. Both of you are going to need a whistle. You're going to need a red and yellow card. You need a net chain to measure the net. You need a ball pressure gauge, because you're going to measure the pressure of the balls before we use them. And you need a ball, handheld or some sort of small ball pump, so that you can adjust the ball pressure. Every time I go to a gym, the balls will be either underinflated, sometimes overinflated, but almost always underinflated. Now, so all the equipment I've talked about up to now is available from Gear Ref, of course. But I also want to point out that Roger Rickman, member of our association, is able to sell us all of the above equipment except for the blue jersey, the blue referee's jersey. And here's Roger's contact information. Note that location is new for him this year. Last three things you need is a watch, and you need a coin. So we're required to wear a watch as R1 and R2, and that's so that there's sometimes we need to discreetly time things, for instance, in case of injuries. And we need a coin because R1 will flip the coin before the match, but R2, you need a coin also, because if there's a deciding set, you're going to flip the coin. And then the R2 is required to have a lineup card and pencil. Just a point, I always carry a lineup card and pencil in my pocket, even if I'm serving as the R1. And you might say, well, why you do? Because you're not going to reference that for the lineup. No, I don't. I carry it there in case something unusual happens. Um, when you award a yellow card, um, I always take out my lineup card and my pencil and I write down it because I think it adds to the gravitas of the situation. The fact that you've done a yellow card. I do that so I can remember what the score was and when it occurred in case there's some problem later. I just write it down, put it in my pocket. And I also, at the end of sets, if I'm the R1, you're going to have the 3-minute interval there, and you got a few seconds to, relax and I always just kind of discreetly pull out my card and write down the score, what the set score was, so that I can remember when I go do my game report. But it's mainly there in case something unusual happens. If there's a long delay for an injury or something like that, I want to write that down so I can remember when it occurred. Okay. So now, okay, I'm gonna stop. I don't like how that ended. Okay, stop. Well, I'll just clean it up later. Okay. So here. All right, let's now look at Rule 7, the roster. I've got an example here of a roster that we'll oftentimes see in a match, but there are no requirements that the roster be, this fancy or this formal. The coach can literally just write out the players' names and numbers on a piece of paper and supply that when they come to the pre-match conferences. There are no format requirements for the roster, but they are going to supply that to the R2 at the pre-match conference. And if they're not able to do that, there's going to be an unnecessary delay for not doing it, or if there's a bunch of problems with it. In other words, they give you the wrong one, things like that. Otherwise, you can change things on the roster. Say a player got blood on the uniform, they need to get a new uniform, uniform top, and they went and changed, put into another number. You can make those sort of changes, and there's not a problem. And then finally, the one thing that does occur very rarely, but does, is a player might come to enter into the set. In other words, they come up substitute and they're not on the roster, in which case that's a loss of rally. And then you make the correction and move forward. So the lineup card, here's an example of a lineup card or a lineup sheet. There are some things that we do have to have here on that are specified as far as the lineup. So the lineup must be presented to us in serve order. Okay, and you'll see the use of the Roman numerals for serve order here and in the score books, score sheets. And if a libero is being used, the libero needs to be designated. Okay, so for instance, if this was game 1, we'd have the libero designation and then the player orders. And then the last thing that must be there is we must have a captain designated. Okay. All right, so the lineup is going to be supplied to the R2 by the head coach or an assistant coach, but the responsibility is on the head coach to supply it to the R2 2 minutes prior to the end of the time warm-ups, in other words, before set 1, and then before 1 minute before subsequent sets. And they're going to give that not to the table, but to the R2. And the R2 is going to keep that lineup until it's 2 minutes prior or 1 minute prior. So if the coach gives us the lineup at 10 minutes before the match, that's great. The R2 is going to keep that. And at 2 minutes before the match, they're going to supply that to the scorers. Okay. It's got to be in serve order. and must have the captain. If it doesn't have the captain, ask the coach. Coach, who's your captain? Who's the playing captain for this set? And they'll tell you. Okay. And you want to mark that with a little C. Imagine we have an injury at the very end of a time warm up. Okay. If you have an injury then or someone becomes suddenly ill, you can make changes. And that would not count as a substitution. It would just be a change due to illness or injury. And now if the coach sends it out there and they're like, oh, I forgot we're receiving and I put my serving lineup in, they can correct that. But in that case, that would be done by substitution, and all those substitutes would count toward their 18 total. And if we don't get these things within the designated time, it's going to be loss of rally point to the opponent. All right, that's the end of the second session, and I look forward to discussing this with you on Thursday night. And again, here's my contact info if you have any questions. Thanks very much for watching.